Oliver Stone's movie U-Turn is here at 10 past midnight. First on 4, an exposé of America's brutal prisons. This film contains images and descriptions of violent and degrading treatment that may distress some viewers. It also contains some strong language.
Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad, and photographs that shocked the world. Iraqi prisoners humiliated, tortured by American guards. George Bush said he was appalled this was not the American way. More American guards screaming abuse at naked prisoners. But this is not Baghdad. This is Prisonniers in Texas. Many American states require prison guards to video raids to prove there's no excessive force. They're searching this cell block for drugs.
Somebody was saying that the guards are going in the cells and pulling people out and stuff, and strip searching them.
One of my clients, he has a broken ankle, and he's really not able to crawl, so they're dragging him. And he's zapped on his behind with a taser or a stun gun of some sort.
My whole body was just doing this. Couldn't stop shaking.
Some prison officers also have electric cattle prods. Others have dogs. This happened 9 years ago when George Bush was the governor of Texas. 2 officers were sent to prison themselves. Most inmates won compensation, including one man raped by a guard in a later incident. But then Brazoria was forgotten until last year.
I flipped on the congressional hearings about Abu Ghraib, and here are these politicians saying this is just wrong, this is just a violation of basic human rights. And I thought, well, what hypocrisy? Because they know we do it here every day.
Tonight, we reveal how America treats prisoners in its own backyard. Youths pounded by guards. Inmates dying after being shackled or beaten to a pulp. An ever-growing death toll in a hidden world of astonishing violence. In northern Florida is the well-named town of Stark, population 5,500. The local economy depends on the 5 state prisons around the town. Most families have someone working inside them. Prisoners also clean and maintain the town. But out of sight, in the 2 high-security prisons, most men are held in solitary confinement.
You're greeted with screaming, just an unbelievable din of noise. It's extremely hot. It smells like a mixture of sewage and urine.
You're in a 9 by 7 cell that's painted white. I've counted the bricks. Okay, I've counted the sink, which wasn't hard. There's only 1 sink and 1 toilet.
Mitch Scott spent nearly 30 years inside for armed robbery and rape, including several years in solitary.
You have a lot of time to reflect, on everything and anything.
The prisons department wouldn't let us in anywhere, but their press officer, Sterling Ivey, said we could film from the road.
Hello. How y'all doing?
Hi.
Good.
From Channel 4. Sterling Ivey knows all about us.
Who does?
Sterling Ivey. Despite that permission, we were stopped every time.
Sterling Ivey, yes.
Because he said to me also that he'd notified both New River and FSP that we were going to be here.
He probably did, but not right here.
But even though they're blocking access, stories of ongoing abuse are still filtering out. One of the worst involves inmates hideously burnt by chemical sprays. The Department of Corrections has a comprehensive website. It lists every single prisoner, along with the offence and length of sentence. This is Sylvester Butler, a career burglar serving 8 years. But this photo was taken by his lawyer. Guards sprayed Butler in his cell with pepper and tear gas for banging on the door. Kurt Massey, doing 12 years for attempted murder. Prison report says he was sprayed for swearing at staff. And Jeremiah Thomas, an armed robber with a long history of mental illness. For refusing his medication, sprayed through the flap in the cell door. Nearly 24 men are now suing the prison authorities.
They usually use large fire extinguisher-sized canisters of pepper spray, which then sticks to people's skin. We've had prisoners who have had second-degree chemical burns all over their body. It causes extreme pain. Officers always try to aim for people's faces and for people's genitals.
Chemical agents are an effective way to control riots or subdue violent prisoners. The lawyers claim pepper is used maliciously and sadistically.
The telltale signal is that they turn off the ventilation fans in the units. We've had prisoners who report that cardboard is shoved in the crack of the door to make sure that it's really airtight.
These pictures came from the prison authorities themselves. When one cell is sprayed, the whole wing can suffer, including staff. A prison doctor told us his experience. He's anonymous, otherwise he'd be sacked.
Gassing occurs certainly 2 or 3 times a week. The security people say, get off the door, get off the window. I've told you 3 times, okay, it's going to get gassed. Your eyes begin to tear and your nose begins to burn. It becomes a horrendous irritation where you're almost choking in your own saliva. I think some of the security people feel that it's their job to punish these people, and they're pretty vindictive.
They sprayed down the wing next to the wing that I was on, and it came through my window and gassed me, okay?
And what was the effect on you? Describe to me what that was like.
It was burning. I couldn't get enough water. It felt like my face was on fire.
Their reports, of course, all say we used 1 canister and we used 3 1-second controlled bursts. And if you look at the photographic evidence that we have of the burns that people received, there's no way you could do that without gallons of this stuff. It's being used just to maintain absolute terror in the prisoners. There's no other word than torture.
The Department of Corrections wouldn't answer any of our questions, but there is a statement on its website. It says chemical agents are only employed as an extreme measure instead of force. So what counts as force in a Florida prison? When guards attacked this prisoner, they broke his ribs, pierced his lung and ruptured his spleen. And they got away with it. Surrounding the small Florida town of Stark are 5 state prisons. They're the major employer here, so few people criticize what goes on behind the wire. But one serving officer will. Karen Jones is one of 6 guards suing the prison department for sexual harassment. She's been shunned and threatened by colleagues, but she's determined to go on and expose staff attitudes to prisoners.
Your ask belongs to the Florida Department of Corrections. You will do what we say do. You will sleep, you will eat, you will go to the bathroom, you'll take a shit. You are now property of the state of Florida. Don't forget that.
That attitude means some officers believe they can get away with anything. From several insiders, including an anonymous prison doctor, we heard about straightforward brutality.
We hear it from people over and over, the same sort of descriptions about just simply being taken into the bathroom or whatever and being beaten up by a particular correctional officer.
I saw where the two inmates were handcuffed, and then one of them was brought out and told to stand up against the wall. Slapped, punched in the head. He turned around. His face on both sides, because he turned his face to hit the wall, was red. His whole chest was red, you know? And what can you do?
If an inmate were to go and say, I've just had my ribs broken, my nose broken, what happens? Is it covered up?
Basically, yes.
How?
How do they cover it up? Oh, it's easy to cover it up. Cover it up by falsifying documents.
What do you do?
Well, somebody else did it to them. They'll put another inmate in confinement and said that he did it.
Frank Valdez tried to expose that abuse. He was already a marked man, on death row for killing a prison guard. But then Frank Valdez began writing to local newspapers about life inside Florida State Prison.
He gave guards and supervisors the reason to want to shut him up. He was standing up for the rights of other prisoners who were being beaten on a daily basis.
A gang of guards stormed into Valdez's cell. One of them was later given immunity for testifying how each of his colleagues laid into Frank Valdez.
Describe how he was kicking him as best you can.
As hard as somebody could. He was yelling.
Have you ever seen anyone kick that hard before?
Not that hard, no.
What was he saying to the inmate?
He was saying, "Who you gonna kill now, motherfucker? Who you gonna kill now?"
They beat him as bad as a man could be beaten. They stomped on his back and stomped on his front, breaking every rib but two in two different directions. His ribs were like splinters.
The guards returned to beat Frank Valdez a second time. He was eventually found dead in a cell. For once, the press were invited in and told Valdez had hidden a weapon and attacked the officers.
I asked a lieutenant that I knew, I said, what happened? And she said to me, Karen, have you ever seen a shark in a feeding frenzy? It just got out of hand.
What was the talk among officers?
Oh, it was panic. It was chaotic. It was, oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to protect these guys?
Why?
Because we're the good guys.
I went along with the cover-up story.
Were the reports false?
Yes.
Did everyone know the reports were false?
Yes. If I knew he was going to die, I would have never. I would have never done that.
Initially, 4 officers stood trial for murdering Frank Valdez. The case was heard in their hometown, Stark.
All rise, please.
I knew we would lose. When I went up there and I saw that a chief of the jury, the head juror, was an ex-correctional officer, I said, this is a laugh. I can't believe this is going on.
Wanda knew Frank Valdez for years, but they only got married after he was on death row. And she was right about the outcome of the trial. The guards were acquitted. Charges against 4 more were then dropped. Jury members said later they accepted Valdez was murdered. They just couldn't agree precisely who'd done it.
You can't go out and kill someone and then walk away from it because you're a correctional officer and say, well, he was no good. If we just go around killing people because we think they're no good, that's like euthanasia.
Valdez's family is now suing the 8 guards, as well as the former warden, James Crosby, who's since been promoted. James Crosby is now in charge of all Florida prisons. Twice we asked to interview him. He refused.
The whole idea is to discuss the prison system in general. Now,
Despite the management's refusal to take part in the programme, we still wanted to hear more from those working in prisons. So we found another way, by teaming up with the local radio station.
He is. How am I going to know if you don't tell me?
There you go. There you go. Let's get to the phones. Who do we have on there, PC?
Fascist Mike.
Fascist Mike, welcome to the Drive Time Happy Hour. What do you got for us?
They're in prison, as it is right now, for being a burden on society. If getting pepper sprayed is the penalty for whatever their infraction is, then I'm all for it.
Across America, the issue of prisoners' rights is not a vote winner, and definitely not in this corner of Florida. But it certainly got people ringing in.
Who's up, PC?
Swamp Possum.
Swamp Possum, what have you got for us today?
I worked in the prison system for a lot of years. These people are not in prison because they missed Sunday school. I don't know what your beef is with pepper spray.
Have you used it on inmates? You've used it yourself?
Of course I have.
What made you use it? What was the situation?
The inmate was armed.
Armed with what?
A large piece of broken glass.
Mm-hmm. And when you sprayed the inmate, you got out? I mean, the pepper spray worked? It did what it was supposed to do?
Yes, it did.
The latest figures show the use of chemical sprays in Florida State Prison rose almost 90% in 3 years. This is the heavy-duty end of the penal system. But across America, we discovered systematic abuse at every level. Get arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, and you'll end up here, a county jail run by the Sheriff's Department. It's a typical Friday night, full house. Just as we arrive, 2 prisoners start fighting. The inmates are quickly buried under a mountain of officers. This jail is run by the man who revels in the title America's Toughest Sheriff.
You should not be fighting. You know, you should not be resisting. I'm not going to have my officers assaulted. When these inmates try to assault my officers, we use as much force as necessary.
But more than a dozen officers to pull a man out of a cell, fling him on the floor, jump in on top of him. Why?
What difference whether you use 1 or 10? Doesn't make any difference. We're going to restrain that person.
Another method is the chair. It's intended to stop prisoners hurting themselves or anyone else. This woman was brought in drunk. A mesh hood prevents her spitting. She's shackled hands and feet.
Hey, where are you from?
We're from British Television in London.
British?
Yeah.
Hi. Okay, take a picture.
Why were you in the chair? They say you were trying to cut yourself with a handcuff?
Well, look here. You can put that on video, too.
They'll keep her in there and do 15-minute observations and keep her in there for an extended amount of 6 hours. And then after the 6 hours, she has to come out. But at any time within that 6-hour period, if the nurse claims that she is safe or that she will not hurt herself anymore, she can come out of the chair after that.
I'm thirsty. All I want is a cup of water. Okay, listen to me. I can give you water. Take the stick off my head.
Okay, I take this off. Why do you go that?
Because I spit on the floor.
A few blocks from the jail, just beyond spitting distance, the American prison industry is gathering for its winter conference. Over 300 manufacturers are displaying products, including several firms who make pepper spray. It's used throughout America.
It comes in two styles. This is a horizontal, and there's another one that's a vertical. This one I would simply, if I were going to use it, I'd put it on a sling.
Right.
I can put it this way. We pull the safety pin, and then we would spray out.
Okay.
And it goes, our distance is about 25 feet of spray
Right.
that's going to go out.
But here's pepper spray in use at close range. Regulations in many states require this to be filmed. A teenager in South Dakota punished because he won't remove sheets of paper he's stuck on his cell door. These tapes provide a sharp contrast to what we heard at the Phoenix exhibition. The prison industry has a budget of over $40 billion a year. 2,000 institutions holding over 2 million prisoners. Tasers are used by police and prison officers in most states.
If you have a focused, aggressive person towards you, you want to stop that behavior. It uses electricity to remotely immobilize people.
This is their promotional video. But here's the taser as punishment. This Florida prisoner is stunned several times because he won't get into a wheelchair. His lawyers say he's also mentally handicapped, and he believes a back injury prevents him from walking. When he won't use a frame, he's stunned again. Amnesty International has linked tasers to 70 deaths in North America in the last 4 years. Although drink, drugs or heart attacks are often the official cause of death, Amnesty wants tasers banned. Human rights groups also want another device outlawed. The same chair we saw in the county jail, graced here by a famous inmate.
What this does is protect the prisoner, and it was made to protect the prisoner. It keeps the airway clear. Think about it, how many deaths it's eliminating. Plus, look how humane it is. If they were spread eagle on a bed, their backside is vulnerable.
That's the sales pitch. Here's another glimpse of reality. This time, Utah. This man has severe schizophrenia, and he was being uncooperative. He was stripped, then locked in the chair for 16 hours. He was then released, but died soon after from a blood clot. We've identified more than 20 deaths in America in the last few years of prisoners who were restrained like this. As a result, some states have banned the chair. But not Arizona, even though 2 of the deaths have been in Phoenix, in Sheriff Arpaio's jails. In Phoenix, Arizona, Sheriff Joe Arpaio often takes TV crews around his half a dozen jails. It's almost a choreographed routine for him, stressing the tough conditions, the convict uniforms, the terrible food.
They know if they mess around, they're going to end up eating bread and water. The criminals are murderers. I'm sorry, alleged murderers. They haven't been convicted yet.
The county jails hold those awaiting trial and those convicted of minor crimes. Phoenix voters like his treat 'em mean policy. He's been elected 3 times.
And you were in prison, now you're back here again, and you're going back again.
Yeah.
Why can't you straighten up?
Because I'm a criminal.
No.
Because you know why?
No, you're only a criminal because you want to be a criminal.
But strip away the showmanship of Sheriff Arpaio and you hit a far more brutal allegation. That inside his jails, prisoners are beaten, tortured, even killed. Charles Agster was mentally handicapped and a drug user. He weighed only 9 stone. 4 years ago, he was arrested in a late-night store for causing a nuisance. His parents assumed he'd just be held overnight in jail.
The telephone rang, and it's the emergency room. And they said, well, your son is here, and he's very bad. We don't know if he's going to live through the night.
The horror of Charles Agster's last hours is captured by cameras inside Madison Street Jail.
He was dragged in like a suitcase. He was hogtied. A policeman was kicking him.
Charles was struggling, so 9 jail staff force him into a restraint chair, still handcuffed. One kneels on his stomach. They bend him forward to undo the handcuffs and restrap him into the chair.
If it takes 9 people to put Charles in a chair, do you know, if that's not torture, I don't know what is.
About 15 minutes later, a nurse notices Charles Agster unconscious. She checks, pinching his face, putting ammonia under his nose. But still no one removes the spit mask or frees him from the chair. We found training documents from the sheriff's own department. These clearly warn prisoners must be uncuffed before going into the chair. Bending someone double can be one cause of what's known as positional asphyxia. Despite frantic efforts to resuscitate Charles Agster, he was already brain dead. His parents are now suing a defiant sheriff.
You can see all the videos you want. Videos don't always tell the true story.
But you're not denying that he's put in the chair with his hands handcuffed behind his back?
I'm not familiar with all that as far as the handcuffs, but I'm telling you right now, we did nothing wrong. I don't like to lose anybody in jail, under any circumstances. But when you run a jail system or a prison system, you're bound sometimes to have some deaths that occur.
But Scott Norberg's death suggests no lessons have been learnt. 5 years earlier, he was dragged across the same jail, confused but not aggressive, and forced into the chair handcuffed. A towel was put over his mouth to stop him spitting. In a later video statement, an officer admitted she warned her colleague Scott Norberg was in difficulty.
I told him that he was turning blue or purple. I don't think he was breathing, and he said, who gives a fuck?
You say what?
Who gives a fuck? And it's some sort of, he's still going to fight.
Scott Norberg suffocated. The county's insurers paid his family over $8 million. There were no criminal charges.
I'm not going to argue this case, it's over, but let me say this. If I did anything wrong on my officers, I would have been hung. They checked everything out. My officers were clear. There was no problems with that case. So I think that tells you the bottom line.
If there had been no problems, they wouldn't have paid out $8.25 million to settle it, would they?
That was the insurance firm. They were afraid to go before a jury.
The sheriff's promise to make prison as grim as possible hasn't deterred the criminals. He put up Tent City as a cheap way of housing the rising numbers. The inmate population has doubled during his 12 years in office.
You rather be in a Mexican prison?
Absolutely.
That's the worst prison jail in the world. You rather be there?
I'd rather be there than here.
We treat you worse than the Mexicans in Mexico?
Yeah.
That's pretty bad.
Okay.
The sheriff enjoys hearing inmates complain about conditions. He's less happy when it comes to allegations of brutality. Brian Crenshaw was registered blind. 2 years ago, he was serving 6 months because of a shoplifting offence.
There was a message on the answer machine from the hospital stating that Brian was there and in very critical condition. I called and I talked to the doctor, and he told me it was a matter of life and death. He said that he had a perforated intestines, broken neck.
Brian's mother discovered he'd been in a scuffle with officers at 10th City. He was then transferred to Madison Street Jail and held in solitary confinement. Six days later, the cameras show Brian Crenshaw taken to hospital after he was found unconscious in his cell. But he'd already told a prison doctor he'd been kicked and punched by officers at 10th City.
They murdered my son. Mr. Arpaio is responsible. He is the head of this sheriff's department. And yet, he seems to thrive on this cruelty and this mentality that these men are nothing.
She smuggled a camera into the hospital. After a month in a coma, Brian Crenshaw died from septicemia. The family is suing. The sheriff insists this was a self-inflicted accident.
You say that he fell off the bunk, but the medical evidence says that's not consistent with his injuries.
Well, we'll see what the medical record shows.
So you still stick by the fact you say he fell off the bunk?
Yes, 100%.
And
we have videos to show that. I'm not going. Once again, I'm not going to get into the details of these cases that are pending.
But he told one of your own doctors that he had been severely beaten by prison officers.
Well, a lot of people in jail say certain comments that are not true. So if you want to believe a few of these inmates to have their own agenda and so on, so be it.
There's now a group, Mothers Against Arpaio, united by their horror stories. Pearl Wilson's son, Philip, was killed by other inmates.
Beaten him and senseless.
She still blames the sheriff, saying his staff allow fights to happen. Oween's had a letter from her daughter in jail describing how a girl died from an ectopic pregnancy because no one would call a doctor.
The bad stuff is still happening, and nothing is being done.
I want a kitchen job. I want a kitchen job.
Sheriff Arpaio
Put in a good word for me. 6 months.
should look into himself and say, do I want to be the toughest sheriff in the United States? Because Arizona is not proud of the things that are going on. Believe me.
See you later.
Have a good day, Joe.
Enjoy the sun. It's great. I love this place.
I feel very comfortable with myself. I go to sleep every night. It's a tough job that I have. I have full confidence in my officers. And believe me, in the United States of America, we have the greatest criminal justice system that there is. And if this sheriff or my people did anything wrong, believe me, it would be well publicized, and I'm sure action would have been taken.
We didn't find that confidence in every state. But even where the prison authorities admit there have been fundamental abuses of human rights, reform can be difficult and sometimes even dangerous. Next stop, California, and the state capital, Sacramento.
For my son, David.
A vigil on the steps of the Senate building.
My son, Michael.
Relatives remember those who've suffered while locked up by the CYA, the California Youth Authority.
My hope is that every institution that houses these children, yes, they are still children, we shut down.
His son Darrell and cellmate Dion were found hanging at one of the 8 units run by the CYA. It's the first anniversary of their suicide.
Shut it down!
Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down!
40 miles away, this is the place they want shut down first. Chadurgian, known to everyone as Chad.
We have conditions which border essentially on what I would define as torture.
The youth system was already in crisis, facing lawsuits over appalling and inhumane treatment. But this was the final straw. In January of last year, 2 staff were caught on camera viciously attacking 2 young inmates. 4 other staff stood around and watched.
I was appalled, sitting atop them and pummeling them over and over, some, 22, 28 times.
It began with an argument in the office, but when one of the teenagers hit the staff member, this was his response. He was eventually pulled off, while a colleague aimed a pepper gun at the youth on the floor. This man's now been fired, along with 5 others. The Youth Authority has promised reform, but that means demolishing the deeply ingrained culture of so many American prisons, centred not on rehabilitation, but on punishment.
I gotta have handcuffs and shackles on my waist and legs. When I go visit with my parents, I gotta wear shackles. My shackles don't come off no time I'm out my room. When I'm in my room, that's the only time my shackles come off. This is supposed to be for violent people, but I never had no violent acts. They said they were doing it for my safety.
Sharif Vaughan spent 3 years locked up for burglary. He described one of the draconian rules inside.
It's called a feeding position. You got to get on your stomach, and you put your hands behind your back, and you cross your legs, and almost like you're getting hog-tied. You know, and you got to get in that position every time a staff member comes in your room.
Thanks. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure.
Barry Crisberg is an expert on juvenile justice. Even before the beatings, he'd suggested radical reforms, which are now slowly being introduced.
I mean, if you put young men in a cage, they begin thinking themselves as somebody who ought to be in a cage. This is one of the harshest juvenile correctional settings I know of in the whole country.
You'll come out for 1 hour exercise in a cage as big as a dog kennel. You'll get an hour program out there exercising, do push-ups, or just sitting out there doing whatever.
In the high security unit, youths were locked in their cells 23 hours a day. The reforms are reducing that to 21 hours. And they're still shackled for the short walk to the shower. For most of the kids here, gang loyalty is everything. Black versus white versus Hispanic. And until recently, staff did little to break that culture.
Essentially, we have converted what should be a rehabilitative mission, which seeks to turn their lives around, and we've essentially run them as junior prisons in California. We have created what we call essentially training schools for gladiators.
More cages, and a stark relic of the old regime. Until a few months ago, these were classrooms.
They would be moved in shackles, brought in here, and then this is school. This would be a classroom. The teacher would hand books through the slot. Charlie Manson is not subject to this level of custody.
So what, there would have been a chair in here?
That's what would have been a chair, yeah.
2 years ago, the Prison Officers Union made their own video about life inside. It revealed a lot about their attitudes.
They may appear to be cages to some folks, but this is what the state will provide. This is the length that the state will go to try to educate these young men. But we do so much for these young people with the hopes that it helps.
Views like that mean reform will be a slow uphill battle. And some campaigners believe the CYA is rotten to the core and should be scrapped.
I think the brutality has become customary. And I think we've gotten so used to this as a way of operating. We've gone so far away from a concept of rehabilitation that the daily abuses, we're immune to them, not unlike the U.S. and Iraq.
Changing the hardened, instinctive behaviour of staff is the biggest challenge for the CYA's new boss.
Those few individuals that don't want to go along with the program, that want to violate policy, that want to use excessive force, that want to do the wrong thing, they are going to be extremely uncomfortable in this environment. If the officer's done wrong, we're going to go after him or her with vengeance.
A riot at an adult prison, a violent, dangerous place. But on the final leg of our journey, we found some of the violence is actually encouraged by corrupt guards. While we were filming in American prisons, an officer was murdered in California. Over 2,000 colleagues came to mourn him. Manuel Gonzalez was stabbed to death by an inmate. No one had been killed on the job here for 9 years, but that underestimates the dangers and the bond it creates.
My members are assaulted to the tune of 9 a day on average. We work behind walls and fences, and they hide us away. The only time the public pays attention to issues within correctional facilities is when there are riots or scandals or allegations of abuse. We sort of have this siege mentality, and so without that camaraderie, I think that the job would be even more unbearable.
The funeral was a green wall of uniforms. In this tight-knit profession, officers back each other up no matter what, and breaking ranks is not tolerated. But that's exactly what Captain Doug Piper did. He worked at California's notoriously tough Folsom Prison. In April 2002, Doug Piper was on duty when he realized 2 rival gangs were being released into the yard together. He reacted at once.
Put it down, right?
Captain Piper wanted to close the yard, but his boss, an assistant warden, told him not yet. A full-scale riot erupted.
Somebody could have simply yelled, "Get down," and the inmates, that would have stopped it right there. Had Doug pushed an alarm or blown his whistle, but he was told not to.
So his superior specifically stopped him doing anything that would have suppressed the riot.
Exactly.
There have been many allegations here of staff doing favours for the gangs, allowing them to stage fights and settle scores. During the investigation into the Folsom riot, Doug Piper raised his concerns, only to find himself moved to a less responsible position.
Everybody immediately assumed that Doug was given that job change because he had to have been somehow at fault for the riot, which obviously by the video we know is not the case. All of a sudden, his reputation was nothing.
Over 9 months, Doug Piper was increasingly treated like a traitor to the job, until January 2003.
He didn't answer his cell phone, and I kept calling, and my daughter and I got home at 10 minutes to 5, and when I came driving down the street, his truck was parked in front of the house. When I opened the garage, he had evidently gone up just a couple blocks and came home and shot himself with a shotgun.
Doug Piper left his family a letter. He asked for a proper investigation into the causes of the Folsom riot, and he said the job had killed him.
I'm very sorry, but could not take the pain any longer. I know you'll never be able to forgive me for being selfish and weak, Please take care of each other, as I could not provide any longer. Never be weak like I have been, and stay strong, love, Dad.
Last year, California's entire prison system came under fierce scrutiny. The state Senate began an inquiry into whether a code of silence was protecting corrupt officers and victimizing whistleblowers.
California's prison system teeters on the brink of being declared bankrupt, not only in its policy, but in its morality, starting with top prison brass.
Historically, the management's been weak. The unions and the gangs have controlled the prisons, and questioning that status quo is dangerous, even for politicians.
There have been a couple of threats. The most recent one was essentially something which originated from inside the prison walls. Powder, supposedly trying to emulate anthrax, was sent to me in a letter basically telling me to back off.
Others have also been threatened.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vodicka.
Officer Donald Vodicka testified about a secretive gang of guards who call themselves the Green Wall.
They were above the law, basically. They used force on inmates. They beat up inmates. They planted evidence or weapons in cells.
4 years ago, Donald Vodicka was working in Salinas Valley Prison. Rumours of the Green Wall had circulated for years. He was asked to investigate and discovered the corruption ran deep.
If an inmate was beaten up, presumably if he made a complaint there had to be some sort of investigation.
It would be squashed at the management level. It wouldn't go any farther than that. It wouldn't go any farther than probably the supervisor of that yard.
Donald Vodicka is now in hiding. We had to agree his lawyer came to the interview and we couldn't say where we met them.
Ever since I broke the code of silence, I've lost everything. I've lost friends that I had associated with the Department of Corrections. I've lost some of my family members. I've lost everything. I've lost my career. I lost financially. It has devastated me. I'm on the move all the time.
Why?
Because I fear for my life.
Seriously?
Seriously. I wear a bulletproof vest on a daily basis.
Show me.
It's a bulletproof vest. I also carry a concealed weapon.
The prison department is now under new management, determined to sack corrupt staff, and the unions agreed to cooperate.
Are you accepting that within your ranks you do have some officers who have abused, behaved in a way that is not acceptable?
I would be a fool to deny that. I would be a fool to sit here and tell you that out of 31,000 people, I don't have an element that has some thuggery in them. There are bad people, and some of them wear badges. We have to find them as quickly as possible, and we have to get rid of them.
At least California recognizes the need for change. Across America, the prison deaths continue. 2 more in the last month in Alabama and Ohio. 1 man after being pepper sprayed, the other repeatedly tasered. Once you know how America runs its prisons at home, then the obscene abuses at Abu Ghraib are no less shocking, just less surprising.
For more evidence on human rights abuses, visit channel4.com/torture to discuss, debate and take direct action.